Chidi Coldsweat is our guest this morning. He is Executive Director, Freedom Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Mr. Coldsweat, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Well, you've heard our own lamentations, and I want to believe that perhaps even more than us, you have some concerns about this. First of all, tell us how bad, if you can, the problem of illicit drug use is.
Thank you once again. So it's really, really bad. I heard Kayla really lamenting, and she has every reason to, because the numbers are quite alarming. So globally, in 2024, we had about 331 million people using drugs. But now that number has gone up by 6.2%. In Nigeria alone, if I'm to leave the percentage and call out the numbers in its actual sense, that's about 14.3 million young people between the ages of 15 to 64 are now actively using illicit drugs. So that's nearly 3 times the global average. So that's how bad it is. And one of the major reasons why it's as if we are beginning to have the meth labs and all these things popping up around is because Nigeria has now evolved from being just a transit hub where people just, take the drugs, pass through Nigeria to other countries, and we are now a production entity, meaning we are now producing the drugs in some of these hidden places. So these are some of the statistics on ground, and it's really a cause for concern that we should really be highlighting in this season.
I'll ask Kayla's question, madam. What's the origin? As I said, I've been well aware of the problem of drug abuse for decades.
Yes.
And it's been a concern for government so bad as at the time that the NDLEA was initiated to deal with the menace. And this was during the military era. So what would you, particularly now, in this age and time, what would you say is the reason, what's the attraction? Why is it that we seem to be having this problem and it seems intractable?
First off, nature abhors vacuum. If one thing is not filling a void, natural instinct of man is to find something else to fill that void. And the number one reason is economic stress and unemployment. It has skyrocketed. Aside from this, is not even a conversation about whether young people are employable or not. The reality is that there is an increased economic unemployment. It is worsening, poverty, lack of job opportunities. In the northern region alone, you have so many out-of-school children. That number has now tripled over the years. Also, we need to realize that there is now much more easier, faster access to some of these substances. So in the past, where people would hide and, they would move things around, people are getting more audacious. Nobody is afraid of the circumstances anymore, or the repercussions rather. And if I'm not afraid of the repercussions, it means I have a renewed boldness to act the way I want. We should also think about peer pressure. Only looking at the music industry alone, the movie industry alone, it is cool for someone to be puffing on national TV in a movie. It's a trend. So a lot of young people want to jump on that trend, right? So there's an increased peer pressure from young people who are now associating drug use to being cool. And, when you're not doing it, then you're not as cool as the others. And of course, other things would also be included, things like mental health, finding coping mechanisms. So the conversations are quite extensive, and cannot just be narrowed down to just one factor alone.
Looking at a report on channelstv.com right now, and anyone else can go look at it. The NDLEA chairman, Brigadier General Mohammed Buba Marwa, retired, said the facility was equipped with large quantities of precursor chemicals and industrial processing equipment used in the manufacture of meth, which you referenced the other time. Large quantities of precursor chemicals. They didn't just manifest. They were either produced somewhere or imported into the country. Perhaps there are those who will be wondering whether or not even our preventive measures or preventive infrastructure and also weak and vulnerable. Because if for instance, assuming they were imported, someone must have, found a way to bring them into the country. That's on the one hand. And you also talked about the fact that Nigeria was once a transit country, and if we weren't able to do anything about the transit nature at the time, then maybe this production thing is not just a producing but also a consuming nature. Where or how do you think these chemicals come into the country, if they do come into the country, or how do you think they are produced without the authorities knowing about it, so we can prevent this deadly trend?
Yeah, so I think that's a very dicey question, and it's a rabbit hole I don't think we even have the capacity to begin to dive into, right? Because there you need to look at all the numerous layers, from importation to approval at where it came, the country it came from, to approval at the ports, and then how it made its way down the street, down security. So it's such a rabbit hole that may be very difficult to get into when you start looking at the details. However, we also need to re-emphasize conversations around prevention, because if you cannot control some of these externals, which I'm sure the government is working very hard to control, what are the preventive measures organizations, for example, like Freedom Foundation and other entities, families, what are the preventive measures they need to start putting in place so that even when the drug is accessed, there is a process of right judgment not to use? And I want to believe that if people are not using, then business becomes bad. And when business becomes bad, slowly you begin to explore new markets. So that's how I would choose to respond to the question, just because it's a rabbit hole of, who is to blame? Where does it start from? So we need to look at it as a community intervention at this point.
Well, we're hoping to host the spokesperson of the NDLEA or even the NDLEA chairman soon, because we've already reached out, so we can get more credible data about this, as you have said. But then looking at another report, a related report, the NDLEA Plateau State Command says they seized more than 9.4 tons of illicit drugs and arrested 1,587 suspects for drug-related offenses within just 1 year. It would seem then that if this trend has continued for so long, the deterrence isn't strong enough. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, if you look at countries like Cambodia, Malaysia, and some other Asian countries who are so strict on what they do to people who are caught peddling drugs, you would find that whether realistic or not, there's a measured, even when people are thinking of peddling to those countries, there's a lot more, I would rather redirect, because the consequences are very obvious and are very drastic. So it comes back to us to say, what are the measures? When this happens, are there really consequences? Do we go back in 2 years? Are we sure that they are still in prison? It leads to a larger conversation. So until we have very drastic consequences for drug use, I think it's only at that point that we may now begin to say, okay, people are becoming more deterrent and more, cautious about peddling, production, and things like that. But if that doesn't happen, if it's not effectively communicated, I think we'll keep going around in circles around how this issue is being addressed.
Well, you talked about vacuum the other time, that nature abhors vacuum, and consequently referencing perhaps that the market is there simply because there are no healthier alternatives. There are those who have also referenced, just as you said, economic downturns, which is making people to defer to these unfortunate destructive paths. What are the things you would recommend as a walk back from that trend, so that at least maybe in the next 5-10 years, we'll stop talking about this, at least, even if not totally eradicate, we bring it down a notch? And the issue that you also referenced about peer pressure the other time, what's the way forward? What's the way back from that?
No, thank you. And I'm saying this with all honesty, not because I work here, but that's why I love what organizations like Freedom Foundation is doing, where we are going into the very abyss, the very communities of people who are using in locations like Mushin and some other very popular locations here in Lagos. We are going to these locations. We are getting these young people off the streets. We are taking them through a detoxification process. For those of them who need to be reconnected with their families, who need mental health support, we are taking them through a mental health support process. And it doesn't end there. We are empowering them with the skills, the tools, they are learning trades. It will shock you to find out that amongst these young people who we think are degenerates are people who are skilled artisans, skilled tailors, who just needed money to purchase a machine, a sewing machine. Some of them just needed a store, but at the time, it felt like there was nobody there to help them. So because of that, they opted for the alternative. But just reconnecting them back to a sense of purpose, ensuring that they are being purchased. What have we seen, in the few years or the 20 years we have been around? People are getting off drugs, they are getting married, they are having children, their businesses are growing, simply because someone or an organization or a country took a chance on them. So if we really want to see a massive reduction in drug use, then we need to be intentional about getting people off the streets, rehabilitating them, providing the psychosocial support they need to be reintegrated back into society. And for young people, that's why I'm very excited about the campaign we are about to launch. We're not just talking to parents, or we're not just talking to young people anymore. We're going to the schools. We're having conversations with the parents. We're not just saying stop using drugs. We're showing you what happens to your brain when you use drugs. And thank God for AI now. We're giving you visuals of what really goes on in your brain when you're using drugs. We are having conversations with parents to say, what are the signs to look out for? What do you need to observe in your child for you to know that something is amiss? And then what's the practical step you can take? Empowering them at the home front. How do you engage without judging? How do you move that child from that conversation into actual support and help? Again, without the stigma and the judgment that comes when young people begin to dabble. So these are some of the, I would say, active steps that we need to take. The government needs to fund more rehab centers. Recently, the statistics is showing that for every rehab center, you have close to 20,000 people needing more help. For a 19-man bed rehab center, there are 20,000 more on the list who are desperately seeking help. So it's a crisis. So more funds need to go into rehab. But I believe if much more resources are channeled towards prevention, then hopefully we would not be needing the rehabs or channeling resources towards treatment.
All right. I'm looking at some messages. Coldsweat. I'm looking at some messages that we're getting online. Legalize it, legalize it, legalize it, legalize it, and then tax it heavily. People are actually commenting on this. Are we not being realistic? Because we're old school, right? I'm an old school person, and as far as I know, drugs are bad, all right? Whether it's weed or whatever it is that you guys are taking. And I see the push online. I see a lot of things happening online. There are documentaries that talk about how marijuana is okay, how it's good for this and how it's good for that. We even have presidential candidates in Nigeria that said they want to legalize it and then tax it heavily. I think this person is a follower of such a person. Let's talk about the categories. I know the synthetic ones are the ones that are becoming very prevalent, especially in the southern part of the country. Yeah. And just so people can understand the figures that we're talking about here, we have a prevalence rate of 14.4%, right? And 14.3 million Nigerians between the ages of 15 and 64 are using psychoactive substances. That's a lot. How many are we? 14.3 million of us. That's a lot of people. And then, of course, you mentioned one of those issues, which is the fact that we moved from a transit hub to a production entity. Now, let's talk about marijuana first. That conversation about legalizing it, and I can see all of them, they're still sending us messages on YouTube here, saying we should legalize it. What is all of this? You're fighting a losing war. Are we fighting a losing war when it comes to marijuana? We're rehabilitating and rehabilitating and rehabilitating and doing this. NDLEA has one program after the other, but we still have people who are still using at least the marijuana issue. Maybe you can speak to that. Vis-a-vis the global acceptance, we see that in parts of Canada and whatnot. What do you think is going on here? Are we chasing our tails here?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. But first thing that comes to mind possible, and this is rhetorical, is it possible that because their youth are no longer as active, that's why they have opened up their borders to ask for more young people to come? Why? Because the reality is there is a decline in cognitive ability that happens over time when you use substances. So will it make money for the government? Oh yes. Will it make the law a lot less stringent? It might. But for the quality of the people in the nation that you lead, what is the long-term impact of legalizing the use of drugs, the use of cannabis, especially when it's not for medical purpose? So I think that should actually be the more important question. We can legalize it, we can make money from it, and everybody can begin to produce at their backyards. However, what is the long-term impact? If it is not legalized and we are having this tragedy, what happens when it becomes legalized?
That's a very important question. All right, so let's talk about the influx of synthetic ones, this methamphetamine business. And if Mexicans are started moving here, it's business. It has become its business now, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the meth epidemic, especially in southern Nigeria. It's so prevalent. People have the gall to be creating meth labs in our country. How did this happen? Where did these people come from? And what can be done about, apart from busting and arresting, what can be done about this methamphetamine culture and this colos business? We see people on the streets just slugged and unable, non-cognitive. You see them on the street, non-cognitive. It's all over the internet. Nigerians jumping into gutters and looking for some kind of sanity for them. How can this be helped? Is it the same method we're using? Arresting, busting? Is that the only way we can stop this?
I don't think it's the only way we can solve this. First off, we need to be honest with ourselves. I'm trying not to say certain things because I'm on national TV, but we need to be honest with ourselves. There's an entry point, right? And that entry point cannot be accessed or paid for by the common man. So the conversations need to go all the way back. We need to have stricter rules and regulations at our borders. Borders here includes both seaports and the land ports. It needs to be more stringent, right? And immigration now has a lot of role to play. You know, the way people are profiled for certain things, when people are coming from certain countries, we also need to begin to actively profile those people to know what's your intent, what's your purpose, not because we want to discriminate, but because we understand that there are risks involved. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but we need to first of all be honest about our desire to solve the problem. Busting med labs are great, but the question is it sustainable? You know, again, it falls back to the law, it falls back to access, it falls back to stringent measures being taken to ensure that these things do not become more prevalent. But just be rest assured that it's not a common man that can bring in things like this from the seaport.
Let's talk about the family, and I'm really being fed by the messages online today. it's happening today. People are talking about the responsibility of families, and I think it's an important point, isn't it? As a parent, are you looking at your children? Do they seem a little off? Are they suddenly so calm? What's happening in the home? The role that parenting plays in, I don't want to say fighting drugs, in ensuring that our children don't find this attractive. I think when we were kids, I'm a millennial, and when we were kids, there was a way the federal government was curating devices in such a way that we would look at such a device and just not be interested in it. Do you understand why? It just wasn't cool to do this. How can that be done from the federal level when it comes to drugs? And what roles can parents and the community play right now in ensuring that we don't drown in this sea of drugs?
You know, and that's why I love what we are doing under our House of Refuge program, which is having conversations with the parents. Every time we have to reintegrate or reconnect a child who went through drug abuse and has been rehabilitated, you can almost always trace it down to a lack of something in the family. And it's not just money, right? It's not just having access to wealth. You can have access to wealth and there is no access to the parents. There is no connection with the parents. Many Nigerians are so desperate to, and rightfully so, desperate to give their families the quality of life they deserve. But as you do that, we also need to remember that we are responsible for the children in our care. So when there's a lack of disconnection, when fathers are not having conversations with their sons or with their daughters to say, I remember one time I used to smoke. Look at what happened to me, or look at what almost happened to me. Please don't get into it. When there's that self-righteousness, no actual relationship with the child, then it becomes difficult for you to say your child should not go outside and find that connection with someone else. Once children hit the teenage age, they are now much more interested in getting validation from their friends. So if a child is not validated at home between the ages of 1 to 12, it means that child will automatically go outside to get the validation from their friends. And then when the friend is now encouraging you to do certain things, you are definitely much more inclined to do. So the conversations need to happen. We need to dump religious engagements and begin to have actual conversations with our children. It's no longer a God forbid matter. It can never happen to my child. It is not my portion. No. What are you actively doing to ensure that, first of all, your child even knows what drugs are, understands the implications of it, and knows exactly what to do when they are being met with when they are being offered such drugs outside? Oh, it will give you a temporal high. What should your child do? Have you built the moral and the mental capacity, the grit and staying power to even manage those pressure from the inside? Those are some of the questions we should ask, even in our churches, even in our schools. One of the things the Freedom Foundation is doing as we are imputing or working in communities and schools is to get kids to take breathalyzers. Why can't they take breathalyzers? Why can't we get people to, before they take part in a common program, why don't they take breathalyzers? I have partners who have launched STEM programs in public schools. And for you to participate in the STEM program, you must consistently take breathalyzers before you come into class. I mean,
Chief Coldsweat, we are actually running out of time. But you see this breathalyzer business, right? This drug test, we've been asking for it for kids in school, even primary, secondary, university, and our lawmakers, and our politicians, and our ministers. We've been saying, maybe we should start to put that, but that's a conversation that will take a lot of time. However, in closing from me, the patient versus criminal. I think this is me and the NDLEA boss. We've had this conversation before, where we were saying, listen, okay, so are we dealing with drug users as criminals, or should we be dealing with them as patients who need help? What are your thoughts from the Freedom Foundation?
It's a mental health crisis. It's a health crisis. It's beyond a you are wrong, I am right conversation. So it's more of these people, because it does something to your brain. Sometimes the brain never heals completely after a person has engaged in drugs. And that's why the Freedom Foundation strongly believes, first of all, see them as a person, that dignity of humanhood. You know, it's very important when there's a sense of self, when they feel like I am being accepted just the way I am, and I am being supported to get healing, and not just physical healing or health healing. There's also the spiritual healing, which is what has made the Freedom Foundation's work extremely different from so many other rehab programs, because there has to be a connection between the spirit, soul, and body. But when the conversation is just, you are a criminal for using drugs, okay, he will go to prison, he will serve his term, and he will come right back and continue. So for healing to be long-term, they must be seen as mental health patients under a health crisis who needs to be reconnected spiritually, mentally, first with self, before we begin to talk about calling them people who have failed the law. That's the position we take at Freedom Foundation, the dignity of humans first, above everything else.
Well, still talking about the dignity of humans, and I know that Kayla asked you something about family the other time. What preventive role can families play now? Because there are those who would also say that this illicit drug thing must have been because family lost its bearing in one way or the other. So those who are producing, those who are bringing them into the country, those who are peddling, and those who are using, They all came from one family or the other. Is there any proposition, any concepts along that line? And even for users, how do parents track, so to speak?
So first up, the Freedom Foundation has a document that we have created that walks families and educators through the process. What do you do the moment? First off, how do you even begin to engage with your child to ensure that your child does not use? It starts from education. Parents must educate their children. You must let them know from as young as 5, 6. The way we have been talking about sex education for kids, and we teach it in the youngest classes. Parents need to do that with drugs. Let them see the impact drugs have and how it can damage. If you need to take your child to a physical location, because what it does to your child is it leaves an indelible mark, a reality about what can become of them if they choose to engage in the future. So that conversation must happen first with the parents. Be real, be honest, let them know the risk involved, how it can impact them negatively, and how parents have little role to play in the decisions they would eventually make in the future. I think that's where it starts from. And that's why I love that Freedom Foundation has that guide that can walk parents through, schools through, churches, faith-based entities, even workplace, through the process of equipping their workforce, equipping their schools with the right information. And of course, the government has an important role. There should be more billboards going up telling us that people should stop using drugs. I don't see that anymore. I saw that quite a lot as a child, but I don't see that anymore. So that's my take.
And that's very true, because there was a lot of public service announcements all over the place, back in time, to deter people. Even at that, see where we are. Maybe more and more of that, and perhaps better messaging will help people get the message. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Chidi Coldsweat is Executive Director of Freedom Foundation. We appreciate your time and your thoughts today.